what that's all about. So Rogue was eliminated in third in the LEC summer split just recently. And it's not like that was the only time, but the problem was they were the best team in the league in the regular split. So you look at it, you're like, third? You don't even make the final? Now listen, if it had only been this split, yeah, you could just say, you know what? These are just growing pains, you know, they'll get there next time. But you cannot take it for granted they will ever be in another LEC final, or they will ever be the best team in LEC again, especially right at this moment. So the thing is, Rogue hasn't just missed this splits window, they've missed 3 windows in a row. And that is a pretty sizable championship window in EULCS/LEC/Western League of Legends history, quite frankly. This team was the best team in Europe, or contender for best, for the last 3 splits in a row. Nobody won more games in any of those 3 splits, and nobody won as many games in the 3 splits combined. So if you go into Season 10 summer last year, this was before Trimby and Odoamne were there. It's when they had Finn as the top laner and Vander, a veteran, as the support. They finished first place in the regular split with a 13-5 record, 72% win rate, and they were clear at the top by 1 game over Mad Lions. In Season 11, this season in the spring, they were second in the regular split. Because of a tiebreaker, they had the same record, 14-4, 78% win rate as G2. But G2 won the 2-0 because G2 psychologically just always somehow manages to beat these guys when they play them. Interesting detail, the team that won the split, Mad Lions, was only 10-8. Remember, I just said Rogue was 14-4. So they won 4 games more than Mad Lions, the eventual champions. This split, Rogue was first place with a 13-5 record, again, 72%. This time, they were clear by 1 game, as they had, this is similar to actually Season 10, but this time they were clear by 1 game over G2, Mad Lions, and Misfits. So in total, that means they had a 13-5 split, a 14-4 split, and a 13-5 split. They won 40 regular season games and only lost 14, which is good for a 74.07% win rate in the regular season best of ones. Now, for context, here are the other main rivals of theirs for the title over the same 3 splits and similar roster moves, etc. G2, 1 split was with the super team, remember, even with Perks back at ADC. G2 over those 3 splits is 37 games won. Remember I said Rogue won 40, so that's 68.5% win rate. Mad Lions, who's actually managed to take 2 splits out of it, only won 34 games and lost 20, lost 6 more games than Rogue. They're at 63%. And Fnatic is all the way down at 29 wins and 25 losses, good for just a measly 53.7% win rate. So what did Rogue get out of that 3 split window span? What did they get? They got 1 LEC final. Okay. They got 2 world spots. Yeah, it's pretty good, but that's also actually just because they were basically first in the regular split. And then you look, you only had to basically win 1 best of 5 at the right point. Because remember, in LEC, the lower bracket isn't a pure lower bracket. You drop based on seeding, so they always had the best spot to drop to. Essentially, only had to win 1 best of 5 each time to make it to Worlds. Then you look, they have 0 titles. So what did their rivals, those same rivals that won less regular season games, what did they get? Well, G2 won 1 title summer last year. They made it to Worlds. Okay, cool. Didn't make it this time. And they had 1 final overall. They didn't make the final in spring or summer. Okay, so they got 1 more title. That's better than Rogue. Other than that, Rogue has the better all-around resume. Fnatic has 0 titles, same as Rogue, but they have 2 finals. I mean, that's already better than Rogue. And they've been to Worlds twice, or they go into Worlds twice, just like Rogue did. Mad Lions obviously shits on them, didn't they? Because they had 2 titles, Rogue has 0, 2 finals, Rogue has 1, and they made it to Worlds twice. So actually, you can make an argument all of their rivals, even G2 who failed this year over this time span, actually got more out of that window. That's why it's so underwhelming and why I'm making this video. Now, there is a lot of context to give it. It's not as simple as just they should have won and they didn't. So before Season 11, so we're talking last year, Season 10, they hadn't made the big moves of bringing in Odoamne as a top laner and bringing this rookie Trimby as the support instead of Vander. Now, the top lane change, I think, is a big upgrade. I think Odoamne, I mean, when his career's done, if he wins some titles, he's potentially, I mean, individually at least, he already can contend with Soaz for greatest top laner ever to play in the West. Like, he's an incredible player. I think he was a big upgrade over Finn, not least because he can play weak side masterfully, and therefore you can play through Hans Sama. My issue is this. The support one, I'm not actually sure was an upgrade. I think it was a mechanics upgrade, and at the time I could believe in tryouts. He might have won out in the tryout. But I think it was a downgrade in terms of intangibles, impact on the team, potential shot calling, calming, your own experience level, what you could do with other players, your mindset to self-sacrifice, etc. So really, it was a different team in Season 10. I mean, that was the team, funnily enough, where their style then was they were the masters of scaling. Every draft felt like it was that. And they would just have boring Orianna as a mid-lane play, which is why, even though Larssen in the regular split was absolutely a contender for MVP, he didn't win because someone like Caps is more exciting, right? Who wants to give a boring Orianna player the MVP? As I found out during my career following League of Legends. In Season 11, though, they made those big changes. Suddenly they looked like, hey, they're not just like a surprise at the front. They should be one of the best teams, one of the best rosters. In fact, when I saw this roster made, I remember thinking, after the G2 roster, which hands down looks like the best, this is the clear best roster. Like, it looks way better than Fnatic's, Mad Lions, who knows how these rookies are going to do. So actually, on paper, they absolutely were a top 2 team. You could even have debated, if you didn't know how some of them would play, that they could have been the best, because, you know, who knew how the G2 experiment would work out? Yeah, on paper, it looked awesome. As we saw in the game, didn't always work out as well. Then you got to add in, from the end of Season 10, they had the experience of playing at Worlds. They bootcamped in China. They played all the great Asian teams. So you could believe, you know what, maybe they got over those issues. Maybe now they're going to come back to Europe even better, fully charged, experience on their backs. No, because here's the problem. In the spring, they were a clear elite team with a totally new style. Now all of a sudden, they're the early game masters. Now all of a sudden, Larssen plays like Lucian as his main champion. By the way, in case you don't know, in Season 10 Summer Playoffs, it was Nemesis pulling out Lucian mid that fucked Larssen. He had no answer to it whatsoever. That was one of his big problems. Then let's add in the spring of this year, Inspired is the best jungler, I would say, in the entire West. I actually think, no joke, this is probably a reach now that I've seen what he's done in playoffs, so I have seen him disappear. But on regular season play, I think Spring and Summer Inspired was the top 5 jungler in the world, and I'll stand by it. Also was MVP material in that spring split, but it was given to Reckless. I understand it. He had a very good regular season. I personally would have maybe, I don't know, that's a debatable one to me. Problem is, they fell apart completely against Mad Lions in the playoffs in the upper bracket immediately. They beat G2, which at the time seemed very significant. Like, wow, epic, they beat G2. But then we now know, actually, G2 wasn't as good as we thought, right? Yes, they were the reigning champions, but not that exact 5-man lineup, right? They almost beat Mad Lions in the final. Game 2 was close. Nobody talks about that, by the way, but they won it and they went up 2-0 despite Mad Lions having some chances. So they're at 2-0, they're at championship point with 3 chances to do it, and they don't convert on any of them. This was like Federer in the fucking 2019 Wimbledon final in that set where it's like 3 championship points or whatever, and he lost the final. So Game 5 is the most egregious one, of course, because when it's 2-2 and all the pressure's there and people are playing dog shit electro songs and pretending like it's really cool, they had, at one point in time, from memory, they had like an 8k gold lead at one point. They were up in Dragons. They had a Fed mid in AD carry. So everything's as you'd want it to be. Pretty much everyone's ahead of their rival on the other side, except debatably Humanoid was like similar level, maybe. Then they basically fuck up a fight around the Baron, and that's just it. That's the end of the whole game. And the whole series and the championship goes to Mad Lions. So, okay, forget about that. We can all make mistakes. At least they made the final this time. At least they're in winning position. At least they beat G2. So you come to this summer, right? This is where it's going to all be tested, because now we're going to get a chance to see if they really are chokers. So in the summer, what do you know? In the regular split, they're the clear best team for the last half. The odd game that they lose, but even then those teams have their problems. Again, Larssen's changed his champ pool. You even see him playing Jace now. I mean, that's about as far from a fucking mid-lane pick as you'd expect for the old Larssen. And it allows him, crucially, to flex with Odoamne top, which makes their drafts even more powerful. Inspired is still amazing. Arguably MVP quality. He did win the MVP. I think he could have been the MVP twice. Now, listen, in the playoffs, they almost blew that series against Misfits, the one they won 3-2. There's no world that should even have been 5 games based on the regular split. Inspired had to do an insane Viego play just to save that particular game, and they still went 3-8 in the playoffs in games played, even with that series win. That was the only game they won in the playoffs was in that series. They never won any in the next 2. They were swept out of the playoffs back to back. And they showed, by the way, in that Fnatic series, they can lose from all kinds of game state. Slightly behind, even, ahead. They can just lose against elite teams anytime and in any circumstances. So what are the issues we're talking about that's making them a team that just collapses in the playoffs? Well, you've got to start, obviously, with their team fighting, right? League of Legends, I know Europe's been able to play a lot of split pushing, but you're still even in split pushing. That's just often to get a player strong, and you're going to eventually have to have team fights, right? It's pretty much a fundamental concept of League of Legends. It's one of the reasons why Chinese teams were always actually underratedly good often. Now, the problem is, they have a weakness at team fighting, which on one hand doesn't make much sense because it's some very good players and the players can definitely get fed. But okay, I think just individually they play a bit too selfishly or don't know how to connect with their other players as much. And so they don't really have like anyone to make the team cohesive. And it's like disparate individuals trying to mimic a team fight. But then they're playing against real teams like Mad Lions Fnatic who actually do fight together. And do go in and do understand that they're all on the same page and what the win condition is in this team fight and how to come back from behind. So the problem I have is I actually think the playing style approach that the coaches, if it's them who decided it, seem to have taken is actually a pretty good band-aid / response to their problem with team fighting. Because think about it. In Season 10, okay, cool, use the draft. Let the game make you stronger and stronger without having a fight so that the team fights are just easier when you get there because it's easier to execute because you're in a stronger position. Then in Season 11, with a better roster, why not just get so strong from the laning phase and always be ahead that you either don't have to team fight or when you do, you're just much stronger and again you win because the team fight is easier for you. But we've all seen when it's an even or especially if they're behind, Rogue is woeful. They suddenly drop and in a team fight you could believe they were like the 6th best team in Europe. It actually gets really disturbing. Now, gamer subs won't make you choke. It's just a delicious energy formula that's sugar-free and gives you a nice, consistent, slow release. It's not like that spike in the regular season and then epic fail crash in the playoffs like Rogue or a lot of other energy drinks out there. So use the code Thorin, THORIN, for 10% off your order. Now, if you haven't guessed or you haven't followed my career, I'm someone who has almost obsessively, because I find it so fascinating, followed players, great players in esports who choke. They get in the big moment. They are good enough to win. They maybe even beat that guy in a different scenario, in a group stage, a quarterfinals, a different day, a smaller tournament. But in that big moment where you've got to win to really prove it, something always goes wrong. Because I find it fascinating because it's not as simple as, man, you just lose it and dismiss them. If they can ever overcome it, sometimes you're looking at the potential greatest players ever, most incredible things. And so seeing someone fulfill their potential, I've always said, I think it's one of the most satisfying things in all of esports. So to me, the problem is this, right? Let's start here. Yes, best of ones are different to best of 5. How you draft, how you play, your mentality, how important it is, blah, blah, blah. But to some extent, even though it's easier to win games in best of 1 than best of 5, it's too extreme to just be like, they can only win best of 1s, but they can't win a best of 5. It's not that simple because, to me, the main difference isn't just the drafting aspect. They tend to draft pretty fine in Rogue, actually. It's the mentality of the players when they're in those circumstances. So I would say this. For me, the reason they choke is when I think of moments where realistically, it's not even debatable, they were the favourite in a playoff series, they basically almost always lose. I went through and looked it up. And in 5 times where I have them in these 3 splits as a clear favourite in the playoffs, based on what's happened previously in the regular split, they've lost 4 of the 5 times. So it goes like this. Season 10 summer, they have the number 1 seed. They play against Fnatic, who they pick. I think they picked it. Do you even pick in EULCS? I can't fucking remember. I think you do. And they pick them. They get swept 3-0. Okay, we come to this spring split. In the upper bracket, remember, they're top of the league with G2. They play against Mad Lions. They lose in 4 games. They lose 1-3 to Mad Lions. Then you come to summer. First series of the playoffs. They're the big seed. They win 3-2, barely beating Misfits in about the closest series you could imagine in terms of how Game 5 played and generally the way the series played out. Okay, rest of the playoffs, they're in the upper bracket final against Mad Lions, swept 3-0. Lower bracket final against Fnatic, swept 3-0. Over those 5 series, not only did they only win 1 of them, but in terms of overall games, they won 3 and lost 14 over those 5 series. So they don't even lose with grace, with poise. They don't even make it close. The only fucking really, truly close series out of the ones I'm listing here was the one he had against Misfits, and they almost lost that. They were 1 kill from losing that potentially. Now, the logic that I've heard some people already say is where you try and take the results in the regular season and find a reason and transmute it to the playoffs. That doesn't work, though, because the argument goes, well, they just beat the bad teams, don't they? And they can't beat the top teams. So people I heard say, well, they went 0-2 against G2 and they had a 1-1 record versus the other playoff teams. By the way, I don't know why having a 1-1 record against the other playoff teams would make you just get 3-0'd by them, but That's neither here nor there, is it? The problem is, if we're going to play that game, here's my counter to you. Okay, well, Mad Lions went 0-2 against G2 and 1-1 with non-playoff teams like XL and SK. So logically, Mad Lions, they're also going to choke in the playoffs. They won't win the final. Definitely won't go back-to-back. Right? Oh, right, yeah, it isn't that simple, is it? There's more to the game than that. Now, I will say, an interesting detail to me is if this was the same 5-man lineup, I'd be going a lot more intensely on all the players. But obviously, 2 players have changed. 3 out of the 5 remain from the first split that I'm talking about, season 10 summer, right? And they do have a different playing style. But if anything, all the changes, but a similar level of underperformance scaled up to how good the players are, shows to me that the core problems are still there. Let's be real. The 3 out of the 5 are the main pieces. They are the core players of the team. It's Inspired, Larssen and Hans Sama, arguably the best relative to their roles. And then also, they have the same coaching staff. Now, I will say, I know very little about their coaching staff in terms of behind the scenes stuff. In terms of on the camera, they say almost fuck all. They're not front facing at all. So actually, unlike a lot of the other coaches I have on my shows, I can get into it, or privately I can message them. I actually don't really know where the road coach's heads are at, or why things are going the way they are. If they understand what's going on, if they have a plan for it, if this is something they've been trying to address. We have no information at all about the coaching staff, essentially. But the coaching staff run the scrims and the practices, right? Now, here's the problem. When I've heard from talking to players, even on some of my shows, it sounds like Rogue is very good in scrims. They win most of their scrims. They stomp the lane like they do in LEC best of ones when they're in the scrims. Well, the problem with that is that can give you a false sense of confidence how good you are, and it means you don't get into enough even or behind mid-game and late-game scenarios to actually practice it enough and show that you're good or fix your problems. So in the real game, when you get in that scenario, you're shit out of luck. That ain't your way to win. I mean, there's 2 teams from Europe that famously were like this. They were both existing in Season 4. It's in the spring of Season 4, in LEC, EULCS, you had Alliance, the Frog and Super team. They started to split terribly, but I was hearing stories, like every time I would interview a player or talk to them, they were like, oh no, we win basically all our scrims, and in fact, we mega stopped the scrims. Then in Challenger, one of the best teams in Europe was NIP, Nuke Dark, Zoro Zero, Mithy, and they used to also stomp loads of scrims and even beat LEC level teams, by the way. But then, because they didn't have a jungler, they would go to these offline promotion tournaments to go into EULCS/LEC, and they were famously the team that it would be a stall out game, and then they would just lose late because they had no clue what to do. Both these teams, Alliance and NIP, even though Alliance, by the way, went on to obviously become actual champions of the LEC the next split, they had famously /dodgy I would say shaky and dodgy mid to late game macro. They were never as good as you think, bearing in mind the leads they can get and how strong the players mechanically were. An issue for me with the whole choking thing is I think some of these players are in denial. I think maybe even the org and the general coach staff might be in denial. I can't say for the coach staff, I have to just guess on that one. Because here's the issue. Not only did I get this vibe when I was sort of going back and forth with Larssen about this on the Crackdown, or was it somebody inside? I think it was somebody inside maybe. But my issue is this. It's very, very common that chokers also are in denial of it and just say, I don't choke, I just had a bad game, or, I wasn't on my game, or I need some more practice, or he was just better than me that day. Even though it's a different opponent each time. It's the same scenario, and it's only them they don't look at that. So I get it, though, because you're a young guy. Maybe it feels emasculating to admit you choke. Maybe you feel humiliated, like, oh, am I even a real man, or some shit like that. Maybe it's an ego hit, like, oh, but I thought I was one of the best players. Like, I can't be a choker. No one wants to believe they're the choker, of course, right? Inspired seems to get it. He sort of seemed to get some of it when I was talking to him on the Crackdown. Larssen, like I say, I don't think he gets it, unfortunately. I think part of that is a defence mechanism in his mind. Odoamne does get it, but the problem is, Odoamne has a very cursed career. He's never actually won, and he's also been on another team that had the pieces and kind of fell apart, H2K Season 6, which, by the way, potentially could have won both those LEC splits, but didn't, but obviously made good by doing the top 4 at Worlds. Another issue is, the longer it takes you to identify that you're choking, the longer it will take you to fix your choking. Now, if you look at the players themselves, right, here's the problem I have. I don't necessarily see egregious stuff from Inspired in these series, but he isn't the MVP jungler. It's like the old Claylove joke. I guess he only mains Evelyn in the fucking playoffs, does he? Like, where is the guy who's the MVP? And don't say, what about that Viego kid? Like, you can't have one time out of 3 seasons. 3 splits, rather. Like, that isn't enough. Certainly he had more good games than that. But my point is, he isn't that, like, MVP level player that he is in the regular split in a lot of these playoff scenarios. He's even going against people like, dude, whip us a fucking role swap to jungle. Is this a joke? Then how about this? Oh, by the way, Ulyoya was also a fucking rookie when he lost that final to him. Larssen, I think, also becomes invisible, but more egregiously because he plays the main carry role in Europe. He stops even being able to play his main champions and carry and have impact on them. It's mental how the guy who plays in the regular split, he almost never shows up in the playoffs. Like, arguably, yeah, he had a couple of good games in that G2 series in spring. Aside from that, though, like, yeah, he's had some good games, but if you watch him in the playoffs, you just don't believe he's actually going to win. It's actually depressing because he is a very good player, but there's some sort of mental block going on there. Now, for Trimby, listen, he's inexperienced. I theoretically give him a pass. He's only played 2 splits ever, but I don't give the team a pass because they chose him. They said, yeah, this guy's good enough that we can bring him on and this will be the piece to help us win. Now, Odoan there, listen, he did look like he had some off games. He's still a very good player, but I'll also say he also wasn't played around like he would pick Jason. They wouldn't even fucking play around him. The guy I feel the most sorry for, by the way, is actually Hans Sama. If you look at these last 2 splits, like, dude, what did he do wrong? He was basically just trying to chill and be fucking reckless, and then, unlike reckless, he doesn't have the solos that just carry him to the fucking title, does he? Now, Larssen and Rogue, interestingly, I see a very interesting historical parallel / analogue already from my home game of CSGO, and that is Device, the superstar AWPer, and Astralis, his team. Now, if people don't know, Superstar AWPer is basically like EU mid laner. You're always supposed to be the main carry of your team and the MVP if you play it right. And just as Rogue is the best team, Astralis was the best team eventually. Now, here's what's interesting. In CSGO, Device, in terms of resume, you could argue is the greatest player of all time in CSGO. I personally think it's simple for my test, but resume-wise, and in terms of resume, Astralis is almost inarguably the greatest team of all time to ever play. So, wait a minute, I'm contrasting Larssen and Rogue chokers, 0 titles, with the greatest of all time, potentially, from CSGO in terms of individual and team. Yeah, because the point is, it's where they were years ago. If you go back to 2015, actually, Device, specifically, and Astralis, the team, were the most notorious chokers in elite-level Counter-Strike. And other players and other teams used to even privately say to me, if you play them in a big pressure match, you just put money in the bank. You just know you're going to win. The question is, when do they fall apart? Not if. So the thing is, they turned that around completely. They also made a couple of changes over the years. And they became the most clutch team ever. Device became a very clutch player in the biggest games, and he has won since then the most MVPs of any player in history. So that's the turnaround that's possible when you eventually get over your choking problems. So I think that potential is here for both Larssen and for Rogue, the team. But they've got to get started on that quest as soon as possible. Because I tell you what, Astralis sticked around for a good 2 or 3 years in terms of the players when they were TSM, Digitas, before they really addressed it and got the sports psychologists and really made it an emphasis. And I know people can say, but Rogue has a sports psychologist. I don't know if he's a good one. How the fuck do I know? How do I know what the issues of these players are psychologically? Isn't that simple? You don't just get so that's like saying just get any plumber to fix a really complicated fucking problem in a massive high sky rise. Maybe the guy's just fixes homes or something. How the fuck do we know? So the problem is you've got to get on with it. Now, I do think, by the way, specifically in terms of Larssen, just like Device, it's your responsibility to carry a bunch of these games. Especially when they don't play around Odo and the bot has an inexperienced player and we're not even in the strongest bot meta. It's your time to carry, my dude. And if you don't, it's not good enough to do a reckless. I don't ever give that to Froggen and other like Larssen, even though they have certain conservative similarities to reckless. I treat them the same as reckless. If you don't win in that scenario and you don't carry some of the games, yeah, some of it's going to come on you, mate. It is. That's just the fair way to do it because you would get the praise if you'd won. You'd be called the best if you won. So it has to be an even set of circumstances in that regard. Now, psychology clearly seems to be a massive stumbling block at this point for some of these players and the team in general, right? This is the most fragile elite team we've ever seen in European League of Legends. I always call them the glass cannon because I feel like they either just destroy you or if you just crack them, they're just done. They fall apart completely, don't they? There's nothing there. They are ahead so often. But here's the problem. When do they ever come back or win when it's even against most of the other teams? Aren't they just a significantly worse team? The spring final, I actually think psychologically has wrecked them. I think that is the wound that they haven't been able to recover from. Because if they win that game, Game 5, I think it establishes a baseline confidence mentally that even though they'd still have other issues elsewhere, they would believe everything could be overcome, every problem could be solved, because they'd have sort of proved it to themselves. Like, they'd have come from the lower bracket, they'd already lost to Mad Lions in convincing fashion in the upper bracket, right? They'd also have beaten G2, all these veterans, everyone says it's a super team, you ruined LEC, there's no way this team can lose. Then you get to the final, you're up 2-0. If you win that 5th game, even after, by the way, let Mad Lions come back a couple, you'd feel like, oh, but we are still the better team. Like, we choked the odd game, but we can reset between and we can win. So my problem in this scenario, by the way, is they actually could have had the moment that turned it around for Astralis in this particular spring split. Because basically, Astralis still, even when they got Glaive, was still having some chokes. They lost the E-League Season 2 final to Optic, for fuck's sake. But what happened was, something like a month and a half later, they went to the major, the E-League Atlanta major, and even though they still had some choke, they lost some weird games in the group stage and close games, they got better and better and better, and then in the final, they had this massive moment where it was falling apart and they were going to lose in Astralis fashion, and they suddenly turned it around, climbed back into the game, gave breathing room for Device to actually get his shit together, and they won the major. And even though it was still a year before they became like player changed the most dominant team ever, that really did turn around. They became winners at that point. They could start to win and they could be the #1 team for real, not just on paper. So to me, what I think you have in Rogue and with Larssen is the opposite of what happens when you're Perks or a Perks teammate. If you're Perks and you're down 2-1, you know that game 4 record. You're just thinking, this is my comfort zone. This is my fucking office. Time to get to work. Crack the knuckles. I'll make him feel the pressure. That opponent even knows my record. I'm going to do this. I'm coming back to win this. I've done it almost every time in my career. I'll do it again. Your teammates, they look down the line, they go, I've got Perks, dude. He just always finds a way, even when he's in the NA teams. He'll get it done. Yeah, I can play with confidence. Instead, with Rogue and with Larssen, you think, right, when does this fall apart then? Well, I mean, they have an 8k gold. It's going to be crazy to see how they throw this one. Wow, they're going for a team fight where they've positioned initially well. Wonder how they're going to miss position for the rest of this fight and let this one mid laner smurf all over them. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Now, in terms of the roster, I do think there is a flaw in how this roster is constructed, and it's actually a point I've been making all year since they made this roster. My one problem is this. It was kicking Vander because of what he represented. To me, he was, or at least could have been, a captain, experienced player, shot caller. So you have a team instead where only Odoamne and Hans Sama are the true veterans in the team. And by the way, neither of them have the personality to be this leader or this shot caller. Then you have Larssen and Inspired, your young studs. Everything's looking great. There's a really balanced team right now. The problem then it's Trimby, isn't it? And he's just a mechanical support who plays decent, above average sometimes, pretty good in the regular split. Still has some brain farts, and I thought just genuinely can't add some of the things I'm talking about, this final element to the team. That's why I wanted Vander to stay with this lineup. Like, I thought, not quite as extreme, but he could have been like a mini Yellow Star / Mithy with these younger and more experienced or less vocal players, especially with a team of this force. I never got to see him with this particular lineup with Odoamne. I'd love to see what he could have done with this Inspired and Odoamne as his top laner. I think they would have won at least this split. I actually think they could maybe even have been the best team this year. Now, the problem here is, and this is why I made this video, they made Worlds, didn't they, because of the way the fucking format works. So my problem is, I feel like they might even think to themselves, hey, we made Worlds both times, so it's okay. It isn't okay. Due to the shrinking / possibly disappearing window that you've just been through. You had 3 chances in a row to win the title and you didn't win it once. You didn't even make the finals 2 out of the 3 times. That's pretty ridiculous to be in that position. Now, here's the problem. Here's why your window is shrinking or might have even shrunk completely. G2, arguably, historically, is starting with the best pieces and is going to make big moves. I just reported it on Twitter. It wasn't really a report, it's just a rumour I heard, but a very credible one, that G2 is going to kick Reckless / sell him. So they could potentially make 1-2 moves and suddenly they're the best team again, maybe even a dominant team like they were in Season 9, Season 10, and you shout luck trying to beat them. Or how about Mad Lions? They already have the best team fighting and seemingly will be in the way of Rogue for years to come. And they are the hard counter stylistically. They're the Virtus Pro to the Astralis of Rogue, if you know the old school matchup before that E-League final. Misfits is improving and possibly could get even better. Some of them are on their first year ever. Fnatic suddenly a real competitor and could easily make 1 move and be a very strong team. And then you've got Vitality and XL. They could almost trip over and accidentally get a little bit better. And they were already sort of on the door of being dangerous dark horse teams, right? So to me, you can't take it for granted that you'll have an elite team next year or have the best team next year. Also, by the way, the Org Rogue in League of Legends doesn't have the history. So they've currently relied on really smart scouting, coaching those players, and then having them under contract for at least next year. But after that, If they aren't a winning team, those players will go to a G2, a Team Liquid, a Cloud9. They will just disperse and we'll have this tragic diaspora. And the reason why I say that is because I just think of another parallel from League of Legends. I think of when Griffin came up and they came into LCK. Think about this theme here. And almost immediately, listen, it took a while because they had to change players in Rogue. But once they got their lineup set, they're one of the top teams. They're actually contending for the title. In their case, they made the finals 3 times. How did they make it there? Well, 2 of the times they made it just by being the best in the regular season. I think you're seeing where I'm going with this, boys. And when they made those finals, I think even they, by the way, were like the tied for the best in the summit. It's just that Katie had the same record and a tiebreaker or whatever from memory. And then what happened with the Griffin team? 3 finals, 0 titles, 1 Worlds, which they couldn't have their coach at, sadly, and then 3 of their players might go down, this is how tragic it was, as the best at their role and or have been the best in the world at their role. Tarzan, arguably now, was at the time. Chovy, everything except this split, I think you could have argued was the best mid in the world. It's debatable with Knight. And Viper, right now, most people would say he's just won the LPL. He is the best AD carry in the world, right? So you had these incredible pieces. And what did he get out of it? Ultimately, not that much. Imagine in 3 years if we're talking about Rogue getting 0 titles, and yet we're talking about Larssen is one of the great, like an MVP at this point for mid lane, and Inspired, the best jungler ever, the true heir of Jankos, right? In the same way Jankos was the heir of Diamond Prox. And then, of course, Hans Sama actually quietly became, you know, one of the most decorated ADC. And then we'll say, and of course, they all played together in a team called Rogue, but they never did anything in those years. Imagine how tragic that'll be. Imagine if they go and win championships at those other teams, but not for Rogue. So maybe they come back next split. Maybe they just win it outright. Maybe they place top 8 at Worlds and look good, a la Fnatic last year. But I doubt it right now, and I have no reason to believe in it.
Hey guys, this is Perks, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. I would like you guys to appreciate his YouTube channel, even though he talks sometimes so much bull that not even I can handle it. But most of the time it's pretty funny and entertaining.
This video was kindly supported by Kris with a K, Lager15, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Shenlong, Travis Goff, Wisetown, Zachary Carter, Zack Schmidt, ochs, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Kris, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and a special thanks goes out to both Jerky's Minion and Joshua Gardner. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask one of those questions for my video AMA. Do you want teasers? Find out who the guests are for my upcoming shows. Maybe you even want to be a nerd having a long 2 or 3 hour discussion with me about anything on one of those video discussions. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.